dust spiraled in the late afternoon sunlight as the stranger rode into Bitter Creek. He dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jangling against the weathered boardwalk. The bank stood at the end of the street, its windows reflecting the dying sun. Inside, the teller counted the day's earnings while townsfolk finished their business before closing time. The stranger adjusted his hat, revealing a face marked by a jagged scar running from temple to jaw. His eyes, cold as winter, surveyed the quiet town. His hand rested on his holster as he pushed through the bank doors. The first scream cut through the air seconds later, followed by a gunshot that shattered the peace of Bitter Creek. At the livery stable 2 buildings away, Eli continued brushing down Mr. Peterson's mare. The 17-year-old boy felt the vibrations of running feet through the floorboards but heard nothing of the commotion. Born deaf, Eli lived in a world of silence, reading lips and expressions instead of words. The horses understood him better than most people did. The mare's ears suddenly pricked forward, her muscles tensing beneath Eli's hand. He looked up, following her gaze to the stable entrance where Sheriff Wade stood, face flushed, mouth moving rapidly. Eli shook his head and pointed to his ears. The sheriff nodded, slowed his speech. Bank robbery, Eli read from the sheriff's lips. Man has hostages. Eli nodded his understanding, watching as the sheriff hurried away, gathering men as he went. The boy returned to his work, but his movements slowed as he processed what was happening. Through the stable doors, he could see people running, taking cover. The bank stood at the center of it all, its doors now closed, curtains drawn. Bitter Creek wasn't much of a town, a single street lined with false-fronted buildings baking under the Montana sun. Most days, tumbleweeds outnumbered visitors. The bank held the payroll for the railroad workers and the savings of every farmer and rancher for 20 miles. It was the lifeblood of the community. Eli had lived in Bitter Creek his entire life. Orphaned at 8, he'd been taken in by Old Man Jenkins, the previous stable master. When Jenkins died 3 winters back, no one questioned Eli taking over. He had a way with horses that made up for what he lacked in hearing. The townsfolk treated him with a mix of pity and awkward kindness, speaking too loudly or avoiding conversation altogether. He finished with the mare and moved to the next stall, where a new horse stood, a powerful black stallion he didn't recognize. Must belong to the bank robber, Eli realized. The animal was lathered with sweat, sides heaving from a hard ride. Eli approached slowly, hand extended. The stallion eyed him warily but allowed his touch. As Eli began to brush the animal down, he noticed something unusual tied to the saddle, a worn leather satchel, partially open. Inside gleamed metal tools that Eli recognized as lockpicks and other burglary implements. Beneath them lay a folded paper. Eli glanced around, then carefully extracted it. A map of Bitter Creek, with the bank circled in red ink. But there was something else, a dotted line leading from the bank to the old mining office behind the livery stable. Eli frowned, rolling the map in his hands. The mining office had been abandoned for years, used now only for storage. A shadow fell across the stall. Eli looked up to see a man standing there, not the robber, but someone else, thin and nervous-looking. The man's eyes widened at the sight of the map in Eli's hands. His mouth moved rapidly, but Eli couldn't follow the words. The man stepped forward, reaching for his gun. Eli reacted instinctively. He slapped the stallion's flank hard. The horse reared, forcing the man to jump back. Eli ducked under the animal and ran, clutching the map. Behind him, the man recovered and gave chase. The back door of the stable led to a narrow alley. Eli sprinted toward the abandoned mining office, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the vibration of footsteps behind him but didn't dare look back. He reached the office door, yanked it open, and slipped inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light filtering through boarded windows. Old desks and filing cabinets created a maze of shadows. Eli moved deeper into the building, searching for a hiding place. The floor creaked beneath his feet. Not that he could hear it, but he felt the movement. In the far corner, something caught his eye, a trapdoor, half hidden beneath a threadbare rug. Eli pulled it open to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Without hesitation, he climbed down, pulling the trapdoor closed above him. The underground passage was cool and damp. Eli stood still, allowing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The tunnel stretched before him, shored up with timber supports. An old mining tunnel, perhaps, or maybe something built during more lawless times. Eli moved forward cautiously, one hand trailing along the rough wall. After about 50 yards, the tunnel branched. Eli consulted the map, holding it close to his face in the dim light. The dotted line followed the left branch. He took that path, moving deeper beneath the town. Eventually, the tunnel ended at another staircase leading up. Eli climbed slowly, finding another trapdoor at the top. He pushed it open just enough to peer through the crack. He was looking into what appeared to be a storage room, stacked with crates and papers. Beyond, through a partially open door, he could see the main floor of the bank. The robber stood with his back to Eli, a bandana covering the lower half of his face. His gun was trained on a group of people huddled against the far wall: the bank manager, 2 tellers, and several customers. Sheriff Wade was among them, his hands tied behind his back. Another man, the same one who had chased Eli, entered the bank through the front door. His mouth moved rapidly as he spoke to the robber. The scarred man's posture changed, becoming more agitated. He turned toward the storage room. Eli ducked down, heart pounding. They knew about the tunnel. They knew he had the map. He needed to get back to the stable to warn someone. He descended the stairs and retraced his steps through the tunnel, moving as quickly as he dared in the darkness. Back in the mining office, Eli peeked out the window. The street was eerily empty, everyone either hiding or gathered near the bank. He slipped out and made his way back to the livery stable, keeping to the shadows. Inside the stable, Eli found old Pete, the town drunk, hiding behind hay bales. The old man's eyes widened at the sight of Eli. His lips moved, asking a question Eli couldn't understand. Eli pulled out a stub of pencil he kept in his pocket and scrawled on the back of the map: "Robbers using tunnel from Bank 2 mining office." Pete read it, nodded, and gestured that he would take the message to the men gathered outside the bank. He slipped away, leaving Eli alone with the horses. The stallion was still there, watching Eli with intelligent eyes. An idea began to form in the boy's mind. He approached the animal slowly, stroking its neck, building trust. Then he checked the other stalls. 5 horses in total, including the stallion. Enough for what he had in mind. Night fell over Bitter Creek. Through the stable doors, Eli could see lanterns being lit around the bank. The standoff continued. Occasionally, someone would approach the bank, hands raised, then retreat after a brief exchange. The robber was making demands: money, safe passage, who knew what else. Eli worked methodically, preparing each horse. He removed their shoes, wrapping the hooves in burlap to muffle the sound. Not that it mattered to him, but it would to others. He fashioned simple rope halters with long lead lines. When everything was ready, he led the horses out the back door of the stable, one by one, tying them to a hitching post in the alley. The moon rose, casting silver light over the town. Eli made his way back to the mining office and down into the tunnel. This time, he carried a lantern and moved with purpose. At the branch in the tunnel, he took the right path instead of the left, wondering where it led. After a shorter distance, this tunnel ended at another staircase. Eli climbed up and found himself in the root cellar of the saloon, directly across from the bank. Perfect. He climbed back down and returned to the tunnel entrance. Back in the alley, Eli untied the horses and led them to the mining office. One by one, he guided them down into the tunnel, a challenging task that required all his patience and skill with animals. The horses followed reluctantly at first, then with growing confidence as they sensed Eli's calm assurance. In the tunnel, Eli positioned 3 horses in the passage leading to the bank. The other 2, including the stallion, he led down the branch to the saloon. Then he waited, watching the stallion for any reaction that might indicate someone was coming. It wasn't long before the animal's ears pricked forward, its nostrils flaring. Someone was in the tunnel. Eli pressed himself against the wall, one hand on the stallion's neck to keep it calm. Through the darkness, he saw a faint light approaching, a lantern carried by the thin man who had chased him earlier. The man was halfway down the tunnel when he spotted the horses. He stopped, confused. Eli chose that moment to act. He slapped the horses' rumps hard, sending them charging toward the man. The stallion, trained to respond to pressure, reared up as Eli guided it. The man dropped his lantern and turned to run, but the horses were faster in the narrow confines of the tunnel. Eli didn't see what happened next. He was already moving, climbing the stairs to the saloon cellar, emerging into the empty building. Through the window, he could see the standoff continuing at the bank. The scarred robber stood in the doorway, gun visible, shouting something at the crowd that had gathered at a safe distance. Sheriff Wade and the other hostages were still inside. Eli moved quickly to the bar, finding what he needed: bottles of whiskey. He took 3, stuffing rags into the necks. Using matches from behind the bar, he lit the rags and hurled the bottles through the window toward the bank, not at it, but to either side, creating pools of fire that cast wild, dancing shadows across the street. The distraction worked. The robber's attention shifted to the sudden flames. In that moment of confusion, Eli slipped out of the saloon and circled behind the buildings, making his way back to the mining office and down into the tunnel. The passage to the bank was clear now. The thin man must have fled back toward the bank when confronted by the horses. Eli moved forward cautiously, the remaining horses following behind him. At the bank end of the tunnel, he could hear muffled shouting above. Eli positioned the horses at the foot of the stairs, then climbed up to the trapdoor. He opened it just enough to see into the storage room. The bank was in chaos. The scarred robber was shouting at his partner, gesturing wildly toward the window where the fires could be seen. The hostages remained huddled against the wall, terrified. Eli pushed the trapdoor fully open and emerged into the storage room. He moved silently to the door, peering out at the main floor of the bank. The robber's back was to him, attention focused on the street outside. The thin man stood nearby, gun drawn but shaking visibly. Taking a deep breath, Eli stepped into the main room. He moved directly toward the hostages, finger to his lips to signal silence. The bank manager saw him first, eyes widening in surprise. Eli pointed to the storage room, then made cutting motions at his wrists, indicating he could free them. The manager gave a slight nod. Slowly, carefully, the hostages began to edge toward the storage room, staying low and against the wall. Sheriff Wade was the last, his eyes locked on the robbers, body tense and ready to act. But the thin man turned, catching the movement. His mouth opened in a shout that Eli couldn't hear. The scarred robber spun around, gun raised. Eli froze, caught in the open. Sheriff Wade acted instantly. Despite his bound hands, he lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the thin man. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. The scarred robber turned his gun toward them, momentarily forgetting Eli. Eli whistled, a skill he'd learned by feeling the vibrations in his throat. He couldn't hear the sound, but he knew it was loud and sharp. Below, in the tunnel, the horses responded as he'd trained them to, charging up the stairs. The first horse burst through the trapdoor into the storage room, followed quickly by the others. They poured into the main room of the bank, wild-eyed and frantic in the unfamiliar space. The scarred robber turned, face contorted in shock as hundreds of pounds of panicked horseflesh bore down on him. He fired once, the bullet going wide, before a horse slammed into him, sending him crashing into the teller's counter. His gun skittered across the floor. The thin man scrambled to his feet, only to be knocked down again by another horse. Eli moved through the chaos with confidence, retrieving the robber's gun. The horses, having done their job, circled nervously in the confined space. Outside, men were rushing toward the bank, drawn by the commotion. Sheriff Wade had managed to get to his feet. Eli cut his bonds with a knife he'd taken from the stable. The sheriff nodded his thanks, then moved to secure the robbers. The scarred man lay unconscious by the counter. The thin one was trying to crawl toward the door but didn't make it far before the sheriff's boot pressed down on his back. By dawn, Bitter Creek was returning to normal. The fires had been extinguished, leaving black scorch marks on the street. The robbers were locked in the jail, awaiting transport to the territorial prison. The horses had been calmed and returned to the stable, none the worse for their adventure. Eli stood in the livery, brushing down the stallion. The animal had proven its worth last night, responding to his commands even in chaos. He decided to keep it, assuming no legitimate owner came forward to claim it. A shadow fell across the stall. Eli looked up to see Sheriff Wade standing there, hat in hand. Behind him stood several townsfolk, including the bank manager and old Pete. The sheriff's mouth moved, forming words Eli couldn't hear. But the expression on his face was clear enough: gratitude, respect. The bank manager stepped forward, pressing something into Eli's hand. A small bag, heavy with coins. A reward. Eli tried to refuse, but the manager insisted, closing Eli's fingers around the bag. One by one, the townsfolk approached, offering handshakes, pats on the back, smiles of appreciation. Eli accepted their thanks awkwardly and used to such attention. When they finally left, he returned to brushing the stallion, finding comfort in the familiar task. Through the stable doors, he could see Bitter Creek coming to life in the morning sun. People moved along the boardwalks, nodding to each other, stopping to chat. The bank doors stood open, business resuming as usual. Life continued, as it always did. But something had changed. As Eli watched, he noticed people glancing his way, offering waves or nods of acknowledgement. Not the pitying looks he was accustomed to, but something different: recognition, respect. The stallion nudged Eli's shoulder, drawing his attention back. Eli smiled, stroking the animal's powerful neck. They understood each other, existing in a world where words weren't necessary. The horse didn't care that Eli couldn't hear. It judged him by his actions, his touch, his presence. Perhaps the people of Bitter Creek were finally beginning to do the same. Later that day, Eli found Sheriff Wade waiting for him outside the stable. The sheriff had a piece of paper in his hand, a telegram from the territorial marshal. He held it up for Eli to read. The scarred man was Jasper Cole, wanted for bank robberies across 3 territories. His partner was his younger brother, Elias. They had been planning to rob the bank for weeks, digging out the old tunnel that had been forgotten by most of the town. What they hadn't counted on was a deaf stable boy who saw what others missed, who turned their own plan against them, who used his supposed disability as his greatest strength. The sheriff offered Eli a deputy's badge. Eli stared at it for a long moment, then shook his head. He pointed to the stable, to the horses. This was where he belonged. The sheriff nodded in understanding, pocketing the badge. But his expression made it clear. The offer remained open. As the sun set over Bitter Creek, Eli sat on the stable porch, whittling a piece of wood. The stallion grazed nearby, occasionally lifting its head to watch the street. A group of children ran past, one stopping to wave enthusiastically at Eli. He waved back, a small smile tugging at his lips. The world was still silent for Eli, but it felt less lonely now. He had saved the town not despite his deafness, but because of it. He had seen what others overlooked, felt what others ignored. In a world of noise and distraction, his quiet attention had made all the difference. The piece of wood in his hands gradually took shape, a small horse, head proud, legs poised to run. When it was finished, Eli placed it on the porch railing, a reminder of the night everything changed. Then he stood, stretched, and went inside to tend to his horses as darkness settled over Bitter Creek.